Now we close many.
You had to shut down farms, and you shut down your farm here. Why?
Because we don't have enough water.
Hidden 2,300 feet beneath one of the driest deserts on Earth, 1 million tropical fish are swimming right now. Not in a tank, not in a lab. In a working commercial network buried under sand so hot, it cracks like pottery, where the temperature hits 113 degrees and rain barely falls twice a year. Fish that have no business being there are thriving. Crops that should be dead are growing above them. And the most shocking part is not that Israel pulled this off.
Ben-Gurion, the father of the modern state of Israel, combined both this vision, but also the practicality to be able to really execute something that is unique and historic in this country.
It is what they found down there that made all of it possible. The impossible reveal. To understand any of this, you have to go back to 1973. And you have to go 2,300 feet underground. A geologist named Eliezer Izar is standing on a stretch of cracked, sun-bleached ground in the Negev desert. The temperature is brutal. The wind tastes like dust. His team has been running routine surveys of the rock formations beneath this patch of nothing, expecting exactly that. Nothing, maybe limestone, maybe a useless seam of sandstone. They are not chasing anything historic. They are doing the slow, unglamorous work of mapping rock. The rig grinds downward through 2,300 feet of solid stone, hour after hour, and Isar is watching the readout the way you watch a kettle that refuses to boil. Then the rig hits something it should not have hit.
Most of the fish that are grown in the Arava for export, about 95% of them, the idea is to ship everything to Europe.
Water erupts upward through the bore, completely unassisted. No pump, no mechanism. The pressure alone is launching it to the surface. Izar and his team step back as a self-flowing artesian, well-powered by nothing but millions of years of compression, climbs into the desert sky in front of them. The water is warm to the touch, which is wrong. The mineral content reading comes back unusual, which is also wrong. And the volume does not slow down. Not in an hour, not in a day, not in a week. Whatever they have just tapped into, it is not a pocket of water. It is the lid of something far larger. And here is what makes this moment count. 60% of Israel is desert, the kind of place where the ground cracks like old pottery, and where rainfall, if it comes at all, arrives maybe twice a year. For most of human history, nobody lived in the Negev permanently because you cannot farm what you cannot water. There was simply no water to be found, until Izar's drill went 2,300 feet down and proved that assumption wrong. But finding water under the desert was not the strangest part of what was about to happen. The giant water source. Izar's team did not know it standing there in 1973, but they had just punched into the Nubian aquifer, one of the largest underground water reserves on Earth. It stretches beneath 4 countries.
The desert climate is ideal for growing fish. There's no pollution, and free solar energy makes the water temperature just right for breeding fish all year round.
It covers more than 772,000 square miles. It holds an estimated 150,000 cubic kilometers of water. That is enough to fill Lake Superior 40 times over. The water itself was ancient. Geologists call it fossil water. Rain that fell on the Sahara when the Sahara was still green, still grassland. Roughly 20,000 to 40,000 years ago during the last ice age. As the climate shifted and the desert spread, that ancient rainfall got trapped in porous sandstone. It had been sitting there, completely untouched, since before humans discovered fire. Israel had found an ocean beneath the desert, but this ocean had 2 problems. Problems so severe that by every conventional standard, the water was useless. The first problem was temperature. When you drill 2,300 feet into the Earth's crust, you get close enough to the planet's core that geothermal energy takes over. The water sitting in that aquifer had been slowly heated over millennia to a constant 99 to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the temperature of human blood. You cannot drink water that hot in a desert. The thermal shock alone damages root systems. You certainly cannot cool anything down with it. The second problem was salt. After sitting in rock for tens of thousands of years, this water had dissolved minerals from every layer it passed through. That sounds manageable. It is only about 1/10 the salinity of the ocean, but it was more than enough to destroy wheat and virtually every commercial crop within days. Israeli agricultural engineers tested it on experimental plots. Within 72 hours, vegetable plants showed visible stress. Leaves yellowed, growth halted. Within 2 weeks, most of the plants were dead. The logical move, the obvious move, was to cap the well and walk away. Israel had spent decades looking for water in the Negev and finally found an entire ocean of the wrong kind. End of story. Except a small group of researchers refused to close the file. They started asking a different question. Not how do we fix this water, but what kind of living thing was already built for water, exactly like this? The perfect habitat. In the tropical rivers of Australia and Southeast Asia lives a fish called the barramundi, a prehistoric-looking creature with silver scales and a wide, powerful jaw that humans have been eating for roughly 40,000 years. In its natural habitat, the barramundi lives in river mouths, the exact place where freshwater rivers spill into the sea. These are naturally brackish environments where salinity fluctuates constantly throughout a single day. The barramundi does not merely tolerate this, it is biologically built for it. Its body evolved to handle shifting salt concentrations with ease. And here's the part that stopped the researchers cold. Barramundi are tropical. They thrive in water between 79 and 93 degrees Fahrenheit. That was almost exactly the temperature of the water erupting out of the Negev. Israeli researchers identified 2 other species that fit the same profile. Tilapia, which can tolerate salinity up to 15,000 parts per million, 5 times higher than the Negev water. And European sea bass, which naturally migrates between freshwater and marine environments throughout its entire life cycle. All 3 species were biologically built for conditions that would destroy conventional crops within days. What made these fish even more valuable was the cost comparison. Anywhere else in the world, farming tropical species is brutally expensive. Fish farmers in Northern Europe and North America have to install industrial heating systems that burn through tens of thousands of dollars in energy every season. That cost flows straight to the consumer. It is the reason premium barramundi in a European supermarket carries a premium price. In the Negev, the geothermal heat that made the water useless for crops kept the fish at a perfect constant temperature year-round, for free. The water rises from 2,300 feet down, already at the right temperature. The fish live in a permanent summer, maintained not by an electricity bill, but by the earth itself, so the researchers had found their species. Now they needed to build something that could hold them. Quick favor before we go underground for the next part. If you are still here with me, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. This is the kind of desert engineering story most people will never hear, and the algorithm only shares it if you tell it to. Now, let's keep going, because what they built next is where the system stops being clever and starts being almost impossible to believe. Building the farm. In the early 2000s, the farms went up. Kibbutz Mashabe Sadeh and Aquatech Fisheries broke ground on massive earthen ponds and concrete tanks across the Negev. They drilled additional wells down into the aquifer, installed pumps and aeration systems, and began filling those tanks with barramundi, tilapia, and sea bass. The fish adapted almost immediately, because for them, this water was home. The first generation of barramundi released into those ponds did not just survive. They grew faster than barramundi raised in their native rivers. The geothermal warmth meant the fish never went through a cold season slowdown the way they would in the wild. They fed year-round, they grew year-round. The brackish water sat in the exact range their bodies were built for, and they showed almost none of the stress markers that fish farms in Europe and North America have to constantly monitor. Within months, the Negev had become one of the most productive fish farming zones in Israel. Kibbutz Mashabe Sadeh now operates ponds spread across 30 acres. Aquatech Fisheries expanded to 49 acres, with annual production exceeding 2,000 tons. A single pond holding 264,000 gallons can support thousands of fish simultaneously. On paper, the operation looked like a success, but any experienced fish farmer will tell you the same thing. Keeping fish alive is the easy part. The hard part is keeping them alive in their own waste. And within months of scaling up, the Negev farm slammed into the wall every fish operation eventually hits. The waste was building up, and it was on track to kill everything inside the tanks. The waste problem. A single barramundi eats roughly 3% of its own body weight every day. In a pond holding 100,000 fish consuming tons of feed, ammonia accumulates fast. At concentrations as low as 2 parts per million, Ammonia burns fish gills, damages nervous systems, and destroys immune response. Bacteria in the water then convert that ammonia into nitrite, also toxic, and then into nitrate. The water gets progressively more poisonous for the animals living in it. Left alone, a fish pond essentially poisons itself. Traditional fish farms handle this in one of two ways. The first is mechanical and biological filtration. Sand filters, biofilm reactors packed with beneficial bacteria, sometimes UV sterilizers. They work, but the pumps alone consume enough electricity to power 50 homes. And operating costs for filtration and aeration can exceed $50,000 per year. The second option is to dump the contaminated water. Ocean fish farms in Norway, Chile, and Scotland flush waste-laden water directly into the sea. The environmental cost is severe. Excess nitrogen and phosphorus fuel algae blooms that suffocate marine ecosystems for miles around the discharge point. In the Negev, neither option was viable. Dumping was impossible. There was no ocean nearby. Water of any kind was far too precious to throw away under any circumstances. It would kill the fish if it stayed in the tanks. It was too valuable to dump if it left them. That is when somebody on the engineering team looked at the ammonia and saw something nobody had thought to look for. Ammonia is toxic to fish, but to plants, ammonia is nitrogen, the single most important nutrient for growth. Farmers around the world spend billions of dollars every year buying synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, manufactured in chemical plants from natural gas through a process called Haber-Bosch. That process alone consumes roughly 2% of the entire world's energy supply. 2% of all the energy on Earth, just to produce the nitrogen that makes crops grow. The fish in the Negev tanks were not producing waste. They were producing fertilizer. Read that sentence again. The single largest operating problem in the entire system was, in fact, the single most expensive agricultural input on Earth, just delivered in the wrong place. The engineers realized they did not have a pollution problem. They had a resource distribution problem. The fish were generating exactly what crops needed, in a form crops could absorb directly. The question was no longer how to remove the ammonia from the tanks. It was where to send it. The closed loop. Instead of filtering the water or dumping it, the engineers ran irrigation pipes directly from the fish ponds to the agricultural fields above ground. The water flows out of the fish tanks, slightly cooler now because the fish have absorbed some of its heat, and into the root zones of olive trees, date palms, and pomegranate orchards. The crops absorb the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium left behind by the fish. The soil itself acts as a living biological filter. Bacteria break ammonia down into usable nitrate, while tree roots steadily pull nutrients from the ground. The first results shocked everyone. The olive trees grew faster than expected. Fruit yields on the experimental plots at kibbutz Mashabei Sadeh jumped 15 to 20% compared to conventional growing conditions. The reason came down to how fish waste delivers nutrition. Synthetic fertilizer dumps nitrogen into the soil all at once, and plants can only absorb so much at a time. The excess washes into groundwater, pollutes rivers, and triggers environmental damage downstream. Fish waste breaks down gradually, releasing a steady stream of nutrients over weeks. The result is healthier, more efficient growth. As for the salt that everyone feared would destroy the trees, here is what nobody saw coming. Olive trees and date palms both evolved in the Mediterranean and Middle East, where soils are naturally saline. They tolerate salt concentrations up to 5,000 parts per million. The Negev water sits at 3,000, comfortably within range. When plants experience slight stress, they concentrate sugars and flavors as a defense response. The dates were sweeter, the olive oil was richer. The pomegranates came in more intensely colored than any commercial harvest the team had grown before. Then long-term monitoring revealed the strangest result of all. Salt levels in the irrigated soil were not building up over the years. The trees were absorbing the salt and concentrating it in older leaves that dropped during pruning. They were not just tolerating the brackish water, they were slowly desalinating the soil around them. The system was now a closed loop, water rising from the aquifer, warming the fish, picking up their waste, feeding the trees, filtering through the soil, and seeping back into the ground cleaner than when it left. Nothing wasted. Every output becoming an input. Think about that for a second. The water comes up warm and salty and full of fish waste, and it goes back down cool and clean and stripped of the very thing that made it useless to begin with. The desert is doing the work the engineers use to pay machines to do, but a closed loop only matters if the math underneath it actually holds together. And the math behind this network is the part nobody outside Israel was ready for. The numbers behind the network. Fresh water from desalination plants in Israel runs between 60 and 70 cents per cubic meter. A 2.5-acre crop plot can require 88 million gallons of water per year, which means water alone costs around $7,000 before a single seed goes in the ground. For most crops, those margins are unsurvivable. Brackish water from the Nubian aquifer costs roughly 5 to 10 cents per 35 cubic feet, a 90% discount. The drilling was a one-time investment made decades ago, and the artesian pressure does most of the pumping work for free. Then watch what happens to the same gallon of water as it moves through the system. The fish farm pays to pump it up from the aquifer. They use it. The fish warm it and load it with nutrients. The agricultural operation receives that same water and gets free irrigation and free organic fertilizer in a single delivery. No water bill, no waste disposal cost. The fish farmers do not pay to remove their wastewater. They sell it or trade it to the crop farmers as a premium input. Two industries that would normally fight each other for the same scarce water are now feeding each other. Neither one could survive in the Negev alone. Together, they make money. Today, multiple fish farms across the Negev produce over 3,000 tons of fish per year. Israeli barramundi gets exported to France, where it competes on price with fish from Australia and Southeast Asia. Production cost with free heat is dramatically lower than anywhere else these species are farmed. Other arid nations are paying attention. Egypt has launched pilot fish farms using Israeli methodology in its western desert. A system born 2,300 feet beneath the Negev is now spreading to deserts across the Middle East and North Africa, and is being studied by water-scarce regions on every continent. The carbon picture is the part that almost does not seem real. Conventional aquaculture leans heavily on fossil fuels for heating and shipping. The Negev system eliminates almost all of that. Geothermal heat instead of gas or electric heating saves the equivalent of 200 tons of carbon dioxide per farm per year. The date palms and olive trees pull additional carbon out of the atmosphere on top of that. A 25-acre plantation with 1,000 trees removes roughly 66,000 pounds of CO2 every year. Add it all up, and the system is not carbon neutral, it is carbon negative. It removes more carbon than it emits. Which raises a question this network has been quietly answering for 2 decades. If a desert can do this, what exactly were we calling useless this whole time? What this actually means: the Negev did not become productive despite being a desert. It became productive because it is a desert. The blazing heat that made the water undrinkable kept tropical fish at a perfect temperature for free. The salt that destroyed every crop filtered for exactly the species that could thrive. The ammonia that was poisoning the ponds turned out to be one of the most valuable agricultural inputs on Earth. Organic, free, endlessly renewable. Every condition that made the land hostile to conventional agriculture turned out to be a feature. The land was never broken. The questions being asked of it were: the conventional way to develop desert is to fight it, pump in fresh water, build greenhouses, override the climate. Israel did the opposite. They asked what this place was already perfect for, and built the system around the answer. As aquifers drain worldwide and climate change pushes more of the planet toward Negev-like conditions, more of the world is going to look like this: hot, dry, salty, apparently useless. But the Negev was never actually useless. It just needed someone willing to stop trying to change it and start asking what it was already built for. 1 million fish are swimming in the desert right now. They always could have been. It just took the right question to find them. If this story changed the way you think about constraints, resources, or what it means for something to be useless, share it with someone who needs to hear it. There are a lot of people out there solving the wrong version of the right problem, and sometimes one example is all it takes to flip the frame. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you have not already, because we will be sharing more incredible stories like this one in the coming weeks. Until then, see you.